Have you ever heard somebody talking, and right in the middle of what they were saying, you find your attention wandering away, trailing off in the middle? If you've never experienced that, I guarantee you a lot of people in your church do when the pastor preaches. I know I have. Many people tell me it happens even in my sermons sometimes. Now, over the years, I've discovered some techniques and abilities to be able to keep people focused upon the sermon. And one of these is a very simple idea that I actually borrowed from film directing, and that is the idea of the macguffin. It's not a spiritual idea, it's simply a technique, a gimmick, to help me focus people's attention and keep it focused on the sermon. So I thought I would share it with you today. Here's a description of it from a film school lecture that I found on the internet.
A MacGuffin is a plot device used to motivate the action in a movie, but by itself is completely irrelevant and unimportant. It's a gimmick. A classic example of a MacGuffin is the statuette in The Maltese Falcon. Although Hitchcock is famously credited with coining the term MacGuffin, the plot device has been around for as long as humans have told stories, with Jason chasing the Golden Fleece and Arthur questing for the Holy Grail. Other examples include the treasure in an adventure film, top secret documents in a spy movie, or the contents of a safety deposit box in a heist flick.
Now, you're probably wondering what a MacGuffin has to do with preaching. Let me give you a few facts about MacGuffins that help us to understand how they can be applied to preaching. First of all, they may or may not be important to the message. A MacGuffin doesn't have to be anything big, or it can be huge. It keeps people's attention in the message, and every message should have an element of suspense to keep people listening for more. And finally, it is revealed later, towards the end. A MacGuffin is something you hold back so that you can reveal to the end to create suspense in your message. In a sermon, a MacGuffin may be an unfinished illustration, a burning question, a moral dilemma, a returning idea, or even just a curiosity. An unfinished illustration means that you start an illustration at the beginning and you finish it later in the sermon. Oftentimes at the end is when you give it, but sometimes it can be scattered through. That way that illustration gives the impetus for people to continue to listen and keeps them interested all the way to the end.
John could not believe his eyes. He stared in wondering at the lottery ticket that was in front of him. He looked at his television screen. He went over the numbers again and again. 14, 24, 34, 27. He had done it. After years of playing and trying, he had finally won the Powerball lottery, and he was about to receive over $100 million. Surely now he could pay off all of his bills. He would have all the special things he wanted. He would be happy. But will it bring him happiness? Does money bring you happiness? Let's see what the scriptures say about that.
Posing a burning question from the Bible is probably one of the most effective ways of keeping people's interest throughout the sermon. Just don't give the answer too early in it. Let it go forward and let them be brought into it so that they understand it thoroughly once you get to the end of the question.
And God met Moses on the road and sought to kill him. Why would God want to kill Moses? He had just given Moses the commission to to lead his people, to confront Pharaoh. There was nobody else qualified, no one in the entire world that could do what Moses did. So why did Moses meet God on the road and God wanted to kill him? Let's find out. Turn to Exodus chapter 4, verse 24.
Posing a moral dilemma is another good way. Tell a story that has a clear moral choice. But make the story believable. Make it where they live, and you'll have their attention all the way to the end.
Sheila needed an A desperately. Her grades were terrible this semester, and it was already her third semester on probation. Now here was Robin offering to give her the answers to her New Testament quiz. Robin said, all the other members of the class are cheating. You won't be alone. Besides, they'll never catch you. Sheila thought about it. If she didn't pass this test, she wouldn't get her degree. And if she didn't get her degree, she couldn't get in the ministry the way she felt that she had been called to be. What should she do? Is it really so bad to cheat? Is it really so bad to cut a few corners? Maybe the Bible has something to say about it. Let's look at Exodus 20.
One tried and true method of keeping suspense in a sermon and keeping people interested is to have a repeated word, phrase, or idea that you continually go back to. The repetition creates a rhythm which keeps people interested and suspenseful. Who can forget, for example, the famous sermon, "It's Friday, but Sunday's coming"? There's so many great sermons that you see where they go back to the same question. We even see it in the Psalms.
Joseph had been betrayed by his brothers. He was in a pit, stripped of his clothes, left for dead. Some of them wanted to kill him right then. Others decided it would be better to make a profit off of him. So they sold him to slavers who would take him down into Egypt. But Joseph had an expression that he learned a long time ago. You mean it for evil, but God means it for good. You mean it for evil, but God means it for good. You can hold on to that. It turned out to be true in Joseph's case. He went to Egypt. He was sold to a man named Potiphar who wasn't so bad. Potiphar made him head steward of everything he owned because of Joseph's faithfulness. And surely one day he would have set him free from slavery. But then Potiphar's wife lusted after him. And when Joseph would not go her way, she lied on him. Once again he was thrown into prison. But Joseph had an expression. You mean it for evil, but God means it for good. God did mean it for good in his life. And throughout his life, time after time, we come back to that same phrase. You mean it for evil, but God means it for good.
Another thing that grabs and keeps people's attentions are curiosities. For example, in this next opening to a sermon, I use a donkey as a way of capturing people's attention and leading them to the subject.
There aren't too many animals that are uglier than a donkey. Its ears are too big. Its tail is too bushy. Its size is too small for most things. It doesn't run fast. It doesn't walk a long distance. And yet, isn't it curious that God has used a donkey so many times? Camels are better mounts. Horses are faster. Elephants make you almost invincible when you sit on top of them. Yet God likes to use a donkey. It was a donkey that spoke to Balaam, who warned him and gave him a prophecy that saved his life and probably saved Israel as well. It was a donkey that carried Mary into Bethlehem when Jesus was born. And now we're going to read today about how a donkey did the most wonderful thing at all, how it was involved in the greatest miracle of all times. Let's look at Matthew 24.
Here's a couple of things to keep in mind about the MacGuffin. Its purpose is to hook the congregation. This is what draws them into the sermon, and to maintain their interest through maintaining suspense. One thing about the MacGuffin, too, is that you need to be building it into your sermon from the very first. We can't put it in the middle. We need to begin to work and think about how we're going to keep that suspense going from the very first planning stages of our sermon.
A MacGuffin is kind of like that last donkey we heard about in that illustration. It's not important in itself. It's what it carries. The idea of the MacGuffin is that it carries the audience on to the last words. It's a way of keeping people focused on what really is important, which is the Word of God. Don't say everything at the beginning of your sermon. Hold back some for suspense, if for no other reason. People will listen better if they have something to listen for. Always leave them wanting more.